Wisp Sports Radio, the voice of women in sport.
This is Season 1, Episode 7 of Active Health. Hello, thank you for downloading this podcast and welcome to Active Health. I'm Dr. Juliet McGrattan, and this show is about the health niggles and issues that can affect you when you exercise or even prevent you from doing it altogether. I'll be giving you tips and advice on how to overcome these issues from my experience as a doctor and a runner. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about bowels, why it is that when you exercise, you often need to have a poo. Now, are you one of those people? There are many of them, and you find that once you start doing some exercise, particularly vigorous exercise like running, you get a sudden urge to open your bowels. Usually it's a loose and sometimes explosive motion. So why does exercise give you diarrhea? Is there actually a thing, exercise-induced poop? It's so annoying. It can be really inconvenient. You might end up crouching in some bushes, generally feeling quite vulnerable, wondering where the toilet might be, and actually, for some people, it can put them off being active in the first place. It is a very common problem, so I thought it would be good to cover on this podcast so we can look at the causes and then we can think about what we can do to stop it happening. So what does cause it? Well, the honest answer is we don't really know. Similar to the podcast I did on stitches, we're not certain really what the cause of this exercise-induced pooing actually is. But there are some theories that do make sense, and it's probably a combination of these. So the first is that when you exercise, your body releases adrenaline. That can also happen when you're feeling nervous. So those pre-race nerves increase your adrenaline levels. Now, adrenaline's good because it speeds you up and helps you to perform, but it also speeds up your bowel transit time too. So stools pass through the gut more quickly, which leaves less time for water to be reabsorbed back into the system, and you end up with a very loose and sometimes explosive diarrhea motion. So that's the first theory. The second is that when you exercise, your bowels literally jiggle about inside you, and that is true to some extent. And the thinking is that perhaps that actually upsets the bowel and irritates it so that it gets angry, if you like, and then it just wants to expel its contents. Another thought is that when you exercise, your muscles need an increased blood flow. So your big skeletal muscles need that extra blood flow to supply them with oxygen and to take away the waste products that form during exercise. So during exercise, if the big skeletal muscles are prioritized over your gut, so there's less blood flow going to the bowel, that can potentially affect its function, and then you can end up with some diarrhea. Now, people who have ongoing bowel conditions such as irritable bowel syndrome or inflammatory bowel disease do seem to be more troubled by the exercise trots than others. Now, potentially their bowel is just a little bit more sensitive, but it can affect them more. It can also affect more women who have weak pelvic floor muscles because the muscles can often struggle to cope as the extra pressure of high impact exercise is too much for them to cope with. And women often find that when they exercise, they can't keep in the contents of their bowel. So they might have to nip off and have a quick poo en route as well. Now, you might find that exercising too soon after eating is your trigger, and that certain foods might make it worse too. So let's have a little think about this. What can we all do to try to prevent the diarrhea that exercise can cause? As I said, we're unsure exactly of the cause, which can sometimes make it harder to know what the right treatments will be. And we can't stop adrenaline being released in our body. We can't stop our bowels jiggling around when we exercise. So what else can we do? Well, first of all, we can make sure that we digest well. Chew your food properly. So it breaks up into smaller chunks and that makes it easier to digest. Also, make sure you allow enough time after you've eaten before you exercise. Now, for some people, that might be up to 3 hours after they've had a meal. It does vary person to person. Some people can get away with it with eating half an hour before or even straight before they go. But for the majority of people, you're going to need to leave a good amount of time, especially if you have a sensitive gut. Secondly, choose your foods carefully. Pick what you're going to eat before you exercise with care. Keep a diary. If you are somebody that frequently has a problem like this, keep a diary to work out what the trigger is for you. It might not be what you think. It also might be actually what you had the day before, not on the day that you're running. And we know that rich, spicy, and sometimes very fibrous foods can be the culprits. So if it is a common problem for you, keep track of what you're eating and see if you can spot a pattern. You might not always find one, but it's certainly worth doing. As well as watching your food, watch your drinks, because alcohol the night before exercise can certainly upset your bowels, and so can caffeine, which acts as a stimulant to the gut. So although having that morning espresso might help your performance, it might also actually speed up your gut and trigger some diarrhea. Very important to think about training your gut. Runner's trots particularly can happen if you suddenly increase your distance, your frequency, or your intensity of exercise. So it's always best to make steady, gradual changes to allow your gut to adjust. So if you are running, for example, just crank up your distance, adding a couple of miles on each week. And this will give time for your gut to realise what's happening and to adjust. Consider your fuel. If you're fueling when you're exercising, if you're doing endurance events, then a lot of people find that sports supplements upset their gut. They're often highly concentrated and some of them have got caffeine in too. So try different brands, see what works for you. But also I would encourage you, if you do struggle with this, to experiment with normal food. Homemade energy bars, bliss balls, bananas, bagels, that could potentially be a game changer for you if you are somebody who finds they react to sports supplements and end up with diarrhea. Calming down. We can't completely stop the adrenaline in our body, but if we're adding tension and nerves on top of exercise, then that can definitely be a cause. So if you're at an event and you're feeling nervous, finding a quiet space where you can relax, taking some deep breaths, focusing your mind on positive thoughts, perhaps even listening to some music to help you relax, can be a good tip as well if you are somebody that finds that those nerves really do affect your gut. And finally, being prepared, because sometimes despite trying all these things, despite eating well, knowing what your triggers are, sometimes it just happens anyway. So stick a packet of tissues in your pocket. There's rarely any left in the portaloos or porta potties, as I know you call them in the US. So stick some of those in your pocket. Perhaps, if it is a frequent problem for you, know where the next toilet is. Plan a toilet stop on your route. If you're on an event, know where the toilet stop is coming up so that you can kind of just feel a little bit more reassured and relaxed that there is a toilet on the way. It really is a case of practice makes perfect and trial and error with this. We are all different. What works for one of us won't work for another. What works on one day might not work on another day as well. So it's really, really tricky, but definitely persevere. Definitely have a go with these tips, and you'll probably find that as you get fitter and you get more used to knowing what your body can take, that you can at least reduce the frequency of your runner's trots.
Conversations from the world of women's sports. This is Wisp Sports Radio.
I would love to hear your tips, because this is something that I know lots of people are affected by and lots of people have found solutions that might help other people. So share your tricks, share your experiences. Please feel free to do that on social media. You can follow and comment at Wisp Sports, or you can do the same for me personally at Juliet McGrattan on Twitter and Instagram, and at Dr. Juliet McGrattan on Facebook. You can also email regarding this, other ideas that you have for podcasts. The email address is info@wispsports.com. So that has been me addressing why does exercise make me need to poo? And in the next podcast, I'll be looking at noses. Why is it that when you exercise, your nose always runs? Another very common topic, quite tricky to find an answer to that one, but we will be exploring it on the next episode. So in the meantime, thank you for listening and supporting women in sport everywhere.